promise still stands. Great is your faithfulness, your faithfulness. I'm still in your hands. This is my confidence. You've never failed me yet. I know the night won't last. Your word will come to pass. My heart will sing your praise again. Jesus, you're still enough. Keep me within your love. My heart will sing your praise again. Your promise still stands. Great is your faithfulness, your faithfulness. I'm still in your hands. This is my confidence. You've never failed me yet. I've seen you move the mountains, and I believe I'll see you do it again. You made a way when there was no way, and I believe I'll see you do it again. I've seen you move the mountains, and I believe I'll see you do it again. You made a way when there was no way, and I believe I'll see you do it again. I'll see you do it again. Your promise still stands. Great is your faithfulness, your faithfulness. I'm still in your hands. This is my confidence. You've never failed me yet.
Amen. Thank you, AJ. We wanted to sing that. I did one last time as we talk about Joseph. As we've been going through the series on Joseph, that's just so appropriate to what was going on in his life, and probably your life as well, because that's a good song that focuses on that. Why was Joseph considered great? Why does God use him more than any other person in the book of Genesis? Why was Joseph's life given in such vivid detail for generations and generations and generations to read? Well, don't think Joseph was a perfect man. He wasn't. He never performed a miracle like Jesus did. He was simply a man, but he was a man of great faith in God. And that manifested itself toward others and in his attitude toward difficulties. And that's something for us to learn. If you have a real faith, a genuine faith, it will manifest, it will make known itself to others in your attitude. Whatever difficulties you're going through, it will show up. A strong faith leads to a good attitude. So when those two essentials are in place, troubles become challenges to face, not reasons to quit. Elbert Hubbard once wrote, "The final proof of greatness lies in being able to endure contemptuous treatment without resentment." Without resentment. Joseph passed the test and his life is there to encourage us to pass it as well. Joseph is a great example for us. Joseph lived by a different script. He could have held a grudge. He could have been bitter, angry, hostile. I mean, as a matter of fact, that's how our world thrives today. They like to be, it seems to be, bitter and hostile and angry. I want to protest this and I want to hate that. Instead, he gives us a picture of godliness in the Old Testament. He actually practices some qualities that mirror Jesus Christ himself. I want you to see those qualities as we finish our series on Joseph. The first quality is grace. Grace. He gives grace. What is grace? Well, it's a terribly misunderstood word. Grace is notoriously difficult. Some of the most detailed theology textbooks do not offer any concise definition of the term grace. Someone has proposed an acronym, you probably heard this, GRACE, God's riches at Christ's expense. That's not a bad way to characterize and remember grace, but it's not a sufficient theological definition of what grace is. One of the best known definitions of grace is only 3 words. God's unmerited favor. God's unmerited favor. A.W. Tozer expanded on that when he said this: grace is the good pleasure of God that inclines him to bestow benefits on the undeserving. That's me. That's you. We don't deserve God's benefits, but he gives them. So grace is not merely unmerited favor. It is favor bestowed on sinners who deserve wrath. That's me again. That's you. We deserve the wrath of God. Instead, he gives us unmerited favor. He gives us grace. Grace is not a dormant or abstract quality, but it's a dynamic, active, working principle. Titus chapter 2 says, the grace of God has appeared, bringing salvation and instructing us. God's grace is what saved you. God's grace is what instructs you. Grace is not a one-time event in the Christian experience. We stand by grace, Romans chapter 5, verse 2. The entire Christian life is driven and empowered by grace. We need to know what grace is. It's not some prayer that the Catholic Church says, let's say grace over our meal. That's not grace at all. Grace, properly defined, is the free and benevolent influence of a holy God that's operating sovereignly in the lives of undeserving sinners. So it's God's love, God's influence, God's power, this holy God of all creation giving me stuff that I don't deserve. That's God's grace. And so Joseph welcomes his brothers back into Pharaoh's palace. If you'll remember the story, they returned because Joseph had kept his brother Simeon as collateral so that they would bring Benjamin back to Egypt. He wanted to see his baby brother Benjamin. He hadn't seen him in 20-something years. So we pick up the story in chapter 43, verse number 1. Now the famine in Egypt was there, and it was severe in the land. It moved all over that land. And it came to pass when they had eaten up the grain which they had bought from Egypt, that their father said to them, go back and buy us a little food. But Judah spoke to him, saying, the man, Joseph, who they didn't know, the prime minister solemnly warned us, saying, you shall not see my face unless your brother is with you. Your brother being Benjamin. Don't come back here and expect food unless you bring Benjamin. They didn't understand this. They couldn't comprehend why the prime minister of all of Egypt wanted to see Benjamin. Look down at verse 15. So the men took that present and Benjamin, and they took double money in their hand and arose and went down to Egypt, and they stood before Joseph. When Joseph saw Benjamin with him, he said to the steward of his house, take these men to my home and slaughter an animal and make ready, for these men will dine with me at noon. Then the man did as Joseph ordered, and the man brought the men into Joseph's house. Now the men were afraid because they were brought to Joseph's house, and they said, it's because of the money which was returned in our sacks the first time we brought in, so that we may make a case against us and seize us to take us as slaves with our donkeys. When they drew near to the steward of that Joseph's house, they talked with him at the door of the house. They're nervous as they're going in. Verse 20, and they said, "O sir, we indeed came down the first time to buy food, but it happened when we came to the encampment that we each opened our sacks, and there each man's money was in the mouth of his sack, our money in full weight. So we have brought it back in our hand. We brought down other money in our hands to buy food. We do not know who put money in our sacks." But the steward said, "Peace be with you. Do not be afraid. Your God and the God of your father has given you treasure in your sacks. I had your money." Then he brought Simeon out to them. He brings the brother out of jail and brings him out to see them. Verse 24. So the man brought them in into Joseph's house and gave them water, and they washed their feet. He gave their donkeys feed, and then they made the present ready for Joseph's coming at noon, for they heard that they would eat bread there. They're about to eat with the prime minister. They arrive back there, prepare to meet him, and they come to bring food, a gift, if they have food. What's the gift? Well, we skipped that part, but verse 11 tells what the food is. The gift is, take some of the best fruits of the land in your vessels and carry down a little present for the man, a little balm, a little honey, spices and myrrh, pistachio nuts and almonds. Jacob says, for heaven's sake, give this man a gift. Your life is in his hands. My life is in his hands. Give him a gift. So they do that. A peace offering. Then look at verse 26. When Joseph came home, they brought him the present which was in their hand into the house and bowed down before him to the earth. Again, they bowed to Joseph, just like his dream said when he was a teenager. Then Joseph asked them in verse 27 about their well-being and said, "Is your father well? The old man of whom you spoke, is he still alive?" And they answered, "Your servant, our father, is in good health. He is still alive." And they bowed their heads down and prostrated themselves. Don't miss this. Again, over and over. That's at least 3 times, possibly 4 times, that they bow down to Joseph. The dream that God put in his mind, they did. This time, they bowed down flat on their face before the prime minister. Don't miss why that happens. And so he quizzes them. How's your dad? Still alive? Because they've been gone for a few years. Verse 29 begins some emotional stuff that's going on. It says, then he lifted up his eyes and saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son, and said, "Is this your younger brother of whom you spoke to me about?" And he said, "God be gracious to you, Benjamin. God be gracious to you." Now his heart yearned for his brother, and so Joseph made haste, and he sought somewhere to weep, and he went into his chamber, and he wept there. He cried. He wept, the Bible says, because of seeing his brother, his little brother. Verse 31, then he washed his face and came out and restrained himself and said, "Serve the bread." So they set him a place by himself, and them by themselves, and the Egyptians who ate with him by themselves, because the Egyptians could not eat food with the Hebrews, for that's an abomination to Egyptians. And they sat before him, the firstborn according to his birthright, and the youngest according to his youth. And the men looked in astonishment at one another. Why? Joseph gave them nameplates, place settings, from the oldest to the youngest. And they're going, how did he know what order we're in? Again, Joseph's playing with their mind. I believe he is. He's playing with their brains a little bit. And so they're in astonishment. Why in the world? How could he have chosen us to sit like this? And then verse 34, he took servings to them. Joseph himself, remember, served them. He took servings from before him. But at Benjamin's serving was 5 times as much as any of theirs. And so they drank and they were merry with him. Benjamin, he's emotional when he sees Benjamin, his full brother. Remember, the others were just half-brothers. But he feeds them an interesting meal. Culture tells us that Egyptians were vegetarians. But here, Joseph commands that an animal be killed for supper. Now, it doesn't say, but maybe he fed them steak and twice baked potatoes and salad and dessert. It doesn't say that. Maybe he fed them spit-fired goat, hummus, and whatever. I don't know what he fed them, but it was some kind of an animal. Anyway, Benjamin got 5 extra helpings. Don't you think they're looking at him and saying, why is this guy? Why? 5 extra helpings. So within a brief period of time, they found themselves treated kindly, sitting around a banquet table loaded with food and the presence of royalty. They were recipients of grace, favor they hadn't earned, kindness they didn't deserve. And let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, isn't that just like God? Instead of anger and cruelty, what does He give you and me? Grace. Grace and abundance. He takes our past of sin and guilt and He pours it with grace and lavishes the bounty upon it. He allows us to fellowship with royalty, and He keeps giving even when we're guilty. I was guilty yesterday and the day before and the day before. He keeps pouring out His grace. Don't ever take grace for granted. The second characteristic, the quality of Christ that Joseph portrayed, was examination. There's some examination going on. Most people don't like examinations. Maybe it brings back bad memories from our school days, whatever. But so we put off going to the doctor, we put off going to the dentist, we put off going even to the mechanic, maybe because of cost, but likely because of fear. I don't want to be examined. I don't want to know what he says or she says. So Joseph wanted to do a little pop quiz on his brothers. Maybe it was he, instead of Ronald Reagan, who first espoused this: trust, but verify. See if they're really telling the truth. He wanted to see if they had changed. Look in chapter 44. He commanded the steward of his house, saying, fill the men's sacks with food as much as they can carry. Put money in each man's sack in the mouth of his sack, and also put my cup, the silver cup, in the mouth of the sack of the youngest, and his grain money. So he did according to the word that Joseph had spoken. As soon as the morning dawned, the men were sent away, they and their donkeys, and when they had gone out of the city and were not far off, Joseph said to his steward, get up, follow them in, and when you overtake them, say to them, why have you repaid evil for good? Is not this the one from which my Lord drinks, with which he indeed practices divination? You have done evil in so doing. So he overtook them and spoke those words. And they said to him, why does my Lord say these words? Far be it from us that your servant should do such a thing. Look, we brought back to you from the land of Canaan the money which we found in the mouth of our sacks. How then could we steal silver or gold from your Lord's house? With whomever of your servants is found, listen to what they say. Let him die. Who is that? Benjamin. And the rest of us will be your slaves. And he said, now also let it be according to your words. He with whom it is found shall be my slave, and you shall be blameless. Then each man speedily let down his sack to the ground, and each opened his sack, and so he searched. The steward searched, and he began with the oldest and left off with the youngest. And a cup was found there in Benjamin's sack. And then they tore their clothes, and each man loaded his donkey and returned to the city. Joseph tests his brothers in a couple of ways. Vertically, would you give God the glory for what's going on? Horizontally, would they throw Benjamin under the chariot? Would they say, it's Benjamin, he did it, it's his responsibility, it's all on him? So verse 14 is what happens. So Judah and his brothers came to Joseph's house, and he was still there, and they fell before him on the ground. They bow again. And Joseph said to them, what deed is this you have done? Did you not know that such a man as I can certainly practice divination? Then Judah said, what shall we say to my Lord? What shall we speak, or how shall we clear ourselves? God has found out the iniquity of our servants. Here we are, my Lord's slaves, both we and he also with whom the cup was found. They passed the first test. They passed the first test. Judah steps up and says, God's found out about our sin. We are guilty. We are guilty. In verse 17, it continues the second part of the test. But he said, far be it from me that I should do so. The man in whose hand the cup was found, he shall be my slave. And as for you, go up in peace to your father. He said, I'm going to keep I'm going to keep Benjamin. Oh, well, what's going to happen to all those boys if they come home without Benjamin? They're men now. Judah, verse 18, came near to Joseph and said, oh, my Lord, please let your servant speak a word in my Lord's hearing, and do not let your anger burn against your servant, for you are even like Pharaoh. My Lord asked his servant, saying, have you a father or brother? And we said to my Lord, we have a father, an old man, and a child of his old age who is young. His brother is dead, Joseph. He alone is left of his mother's children. His father loves him, Benjamin. Then you said to your servants, bring him down to me, that I may set my eyes on him. And we said to my Lord, the lad cannot leave his father, for if he should leave his father would die. But you said to your servants, unless your youngest brother comes down with you, you shall see my face no more. And so it was when we went up to your servant, my father, that we told him the words of my Lord. And our father said, go back and buy us a little food. But we said, we cannot go down if our youngest brother is not with us. Then we will go down, for we may not see the man's face unless our youngest brother is with us. Then your servant, my father, said to us, you know that my wife bore me 2 sons, Rachel. And the one went out for me, Joseph. And I said, surely he is torn to pieces, and I have not seen him since. But if you take this one also from me, and calamity befalls on him, Benjamin, you shall bring down my gray hair with sorrow to the grave. I'll die if something happens to Benjamin. Now therefore, when I come to your servant my father, and the lad is not with us, since his life is bound up in the lad's life, it will happen when he sees that the lad is not with us, he will die. So your servants will bring down the gray hair of your servant, our father, with sorrow to the grave. For your servant became surety for the lad to my father, saying, if I do not bring him back to you, then I shall bear the blame. Judah says, I said, I'll take it. I'll take the blame, Dad. Jacob, I'll take the blame. If I don't bring back Benjamin, you can do what you want to with me. Now therefore, please let your servant remain instead of the lad. He said, let me stay. Let Benjamin go back. For how shall I go up to my father if the lad is not with me, lest perhaps I see the evil that would come upon my father? He said, my dad's going to die. He's going to die if Benjamin doesn't come home. And so they pass the second part of the exam. Judah offers to take Benjamin's place. This is significant because Judah was the one who convinced his brothers to kill Joseph in the first place. Judah was the one who talked them into selling him. He said, well, let's sell him. So they passed the test. 2 decades since they sold their brother as a slave. Here's what happens. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher had changed. Life was different. Their conscience needed to be cleared. They were different. They were transformed. How about you? In the last 2 decades, have you changed? Physically, yes. But I mean spiritually. Either you're more focused on God today than you were, or you're more focused on yourself today than you were. Which one is it? What's more important in your life, you or God? You do know that God tests us, don't you? God tests us. He examines us. He wants us to see if we mean what we say. He wants to know if we'll keep our commitments to Him, if we'll obey His commands. Don't be surprised if God places an exam in your life to evaluate your faith. My mother and her 2 sisters were powerfully tested in the area of their sons. My Aunt Hazel's son was killed in a tragic 18-wheeler accident, and he left 2 little babies behind. My Aunt Carolyn's son committed suicide when he was 26 years old, devastating his family. My mother's oldest, my brother, was hit in the head with a baseball bat and paralyzed at the age of 8. You talk about testing. Those incidents examine their faith to the very core. God may test you. Peter says in the New Testament, you better get ready. 1 Peter 4:16, if anyone suffers as a Christian, let him not be ashamed, but let him glorify God in this matter. If you're going to be tested, are you going to give God the glory, or are you going to give God the blame? Most immature Christians will give God the blame. God, why did you do this to me? God, why is this happening to me? So the brothers had been transformed, and that's why I believe Joseph decided to take off his mask of secrecy, which is the next quality, and that's transparency. It's transparency. This is one of the most powerful scriptures in all the Bible. Chapter 45. Joseph could not restrain himself before all those who stood by him. And he cried out, "Make everyone go out from me." So no one stood with him while Joseph made himself known to his brothers. And he wept aloud. And the Egyptians and the house of Pharaoh heard it. What's going on? Joseph's about to tell them. Don't miss this part that Joseph wept out loud. The Egyptians heard it out of the court, out of his house. The people even in Pharaoh's house, which was probably next door, heard Joseph's wailing. The one who seemed to have it all together became an emotional wreck when he first saw his brothers, when he first saw Benjamin, and when he was about to reveal himself to them. You know, it's okay to be emotional. It's okay to release pent-up feelings of despair and grief and pain. And for the first time, Joseph speaks to them in Hebrew. In verse 3, Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph." In Hebrew, that is, Ani Yosef. I'm Joseph, your brother. I'm Joseph. Can you imagine the astonishment of those 11 brothers? Not just a deer in the headlights look, utter fear. What is he going to do to us? What is he going to do to us? They're speechless. They don't know what to say. Joseph says, "I'm Joseph." And then he says, "Does my father still live?" Why does he ask them that again? Because he asked them a minute ago, "Is your dad still alive?" And they said, "Yes." They told him all that. But he says it again. "I'm Joseph. Is my dad? Is Jacob? Is he still alive? I want to see him. I want to see my daddy." And they're speechless. Verse 4, look what happens. Joseph said to his brothers, "Please come near to me." And so they came near. Then he said, "I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt." The word in verse 4, "come near," is focusing on intimacy. It's not just get a little closer so you can hear me. It is, I want to hug you. I want to hug you. Joseph now knows that full transparency will begin the healing process. Those brothers needed to know who he was. Did you know Jesus knows the same about you and me? He revealed himself as God in the flesh. He did that to begin the healing process. Why? You and I, we are sinners. We have betrayed God just as the brothers have betrayed Joseph. God knows your sin. He knows your problems, your hurts, your despairs, and your issues. You know what? He loves you anyway. He loves you anyway. Jesus calls us to himself, and he embraces us with his love and his healing. He says this, "Come unto me, all you who are labor and heavy laden, and I will give you rest." Come to me. Come near to me. And so, just like Joseph, the one who was rejected is the same one who worked so hard to get us reunited with him. That's a picture of Jesus on the cross. He loves you, and his table is full, waiting to fill you with his grace and healing.